I came in to the kitchen and my mother was in tears because she had heard that it had been a successful audition. So that was the end of the Royal College of Music,
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. I'm joined by my brother-in-arms, Mr. Paul Bindig. How are you, sir?
David, I'm excited to be here once again. Great to be back.
No, it is. And look, our guest today has been 5 years in the making. When I first started this podcast, Paul, in 2019, I had sort of in my mind a bucket list of sort of 5 or 10 amazing players I've admired over the years, and Mr. Steve Nieve is one of them. So it's been an absolute thrill to have just spent an hour speaking with Steve. Most people will know Steve for his work as a keyboard player with Elvis Costello and the Attractions and then the Imposters, but that's just one small component of Steve's career. So as you'll hear, we talk about that and lots more. So do jump in, enjoy the interview, and we'll speak to you at the end of the show. Steve, I can't tell you how excited we are to have you on the show, sir. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm in Normandy, which is a sort of part of France, I suppose, quite close to the English Channel. So it's as close as you can get to England in France. It's lovely to speak with you.
No, it's absolutely a pleasure. So I thought we'd first kick off, Steve. We're just talking about your last year. I know you've had an incredibly busy year as always, but just tell us about what you've been up to over the last 12 months or so.
Yeah, in fact, it's been incredible. The last 2 years have been really incredibly full of action, and especially with Elvis and the Imposters. So we've done an incredible amount of concerts. And, not the same show each time, a different show. And the last time we were out, it was great because we got this whole sort of acoustic set in the middle of our set with Pete, our drummer, Pete Thomas, got himself a cocktail drum kit. And, so it gave us a whole nother sort of a whole nother voice to adopt to Elvis's song. So it was great.
And I mean, I've seen some of the footage, and we're going to talk about your rig and that later, but the energy in those shows still remains incredible. I've seen a lot of the 2025 videos, and your energy also remains incredible. But we'll talk about that in a little while.
I mean, one of the great things I think about the recent shows is Elvis's voice is definitely on a peak at the moment, and his singing is just fantastic.
Yeah, agree totally. So I thought we'll dive a decade or two back, Steve, to your childhood and adolescence before. So I'm thinking sort of the period pre-1977. What was your first exposure to music?
According to my mother, when I was like 3 years old, they didn't have a piano or anything in the house. And according to my mother, I would sit down, get a bit of paper and draw a keyboard, and then sit there and pretend to be playing it. And so they knew that they had to organize something, And my first memory, actually, of a musical instrument was when my dad took the wheelbarrow out of the garden and we walked round to the church, and they had a harmonium that they were going to destroy if someone didn't decide to take it. And so that was my first keyboard. We carried it back home in the wheelbarrow, which I don't think was a very good idea. I think he probably hurt himself actually doing that. But then he investigated everything about this harmonium, and he completely fixed it and repaired it for me. And that was my first keyboard, this pump organ.
Wow. And so did you end up taking lessons, Steve, at that stage?
I did. I ended up taking piano lessons with a teacher that I adored. This old lady whose name is now escaping me, which is part of my problem is, I know her name, but it won't come to me. But anyway, I loved her, and I got on very well with her, and we did piano lessons every week. But then she passed, and I went to a new piano teacher who I didn't get on with at all. And so my classical side got slightly interrupted, and that's when I started seeking out different kind of music.
And what were you seeking out? Say, and I'm assuming teenage years here, Steve. What were you seeking out?
You know, I definitely had a mixture of musical knowledge coming to me, because I had the classical side, and I was in the end, I went to the Royal College of Music. So I was studying music. So I was particularly interested in sort of weird avant-garde music, you know. I'm not saying that I produced any myself, but I did listen to things. And also, at the same time, I was interested in, you know, things like Alice Cooper and T-Rex and the pop music of the day. So, yeah.
And while you were at the Royal College, Steve, were you involved in either ensembles within the college or in bands elsewhere while you were doing that, your study?
To be honest, I think I was a bit, you know, socially awkward, and I didn't really fit in college, and found the system of college to be extremely difficult. I couldn't understand it, and I couldn't get in time with it, if you see what I mean. So I did form my own ensemble, but basically we were a ragbag of what I would term bad students. And we produced some sort of, I don't know, rhythmic, almost jazz-like music. But, you know, I don't think at that time, things have changed now. And the Royal College of Music and the Royal Academy of Music are much more open to different forms of music. But at that time, right in the 1970s, that was not the case. And so they didn't like that.
Yes.
So it was a good job that, you know, I discovered my future when I did, because, you know, they were not going to keep me.
Yeah. And let's talk about discovering your future. So what was sort of the lead up to 1977 and joining Elvis and the relationship you've had since?
Well, one of the things was that the Royal College of Music is situated just next door to the Royal Albert Hall. It's in a part of Kensington where there used to be the Kensington Market, which used to be a superb place to go hang out and avoid proper study. But inside Kensington Market, there was some really great record stores. And that was where I used to hang out in the incense smelling Kensington Market. And I bought a lot of albums there and discovered a lot of music thanks to that place.
So, Steve, I'm really interested in you moving from being a classical student at the Royal College of Music, and you moved into Elvis and the Attractions as a very young man. How did that process happen? How did you move from the classical student?
Okay, well, I'll tell you how it happened, but before I do, just say one thing.
Yeah,
I
please.
was at the Royal College of Music to study composition and piano. That's a second instrument. And the guy that I had was teaching not only me, but he taught Rick Wakeman and a couple of other people that, you know. So he was kind of the guy who, it seemed that a lot of his students ended up becoming rock musicians, which is kind of odd when I think about it.
Steve, do you think that was partly due to an influence of some kind that he may have had, or is this coincidence, or what do you put that down to?
I don't really know. I mean, I was, you know, hanging out at the Kensington Market. I was buying the Melody Maker and the New Musical Express, and I searched in there for. I eventually found an advert. They were advertising for a keyboard player, and it was basically this: that if I hadn't have been doing that, I would probably have never followed this path. So it was pure chance, really. But anyway, I went along to an audition, and that's how I discovered Elvis and got involved in this walk of life of mine.
So you've answered an ad in either NME or Melody Maker. You've gone to an audition. Take us into the room. What happened? What did they ask you to do? How were they to you when you came in? How were you feeling?
Okay, well, the room was set up with a keyboard in it, and it was a Hammond organ, which to anyone who had never played a Hammond organ, I had never played a Hammond organ, could have been a bit of a daunting experience. But when I was a young kid, I actually used to play the organ at church, and I did actually become the choir master of my local church. So I had some sort of experience with organs, and I knew, the basic process of selecting the tone and that kind of thing. And basically, I think the musician, there was a bass player and a drummer there from Graham Parker and the Rumour, Bertie Bogner, and they were going around a couple of songs. I do not remember exactly what we did. I think it might have been less than zero, one of the songs. But anyway, I just basically played by ear what I needed to play, and it seemed to go all right. I don't know how I did it, actually, looking back on it. But I used to play everything by ear rather than reading music, which I knew how to do. But it wasn't really that I used to do. I used to play by ear most of the time. So, the audition went fine. And at the end of the audition, I asked them if I could stay. And, I went to the back of the room and I stayed there while all the other candidates came in. And at the end of the thing, they said, "Do you want to come with us? We're going to go and have an Indian meal." I mean, all the people involved in rock music used to eat Indian curries all the time. That seemed to be the thing. And so I went to an Indian restaurant with them, and they were talking about music, and suddenly I realized, oh my God, I'm going to miss the last train back to the suburbs. I better get going. So that was that. And then I suppose a couple of weeks after that, I came into the kitchen and my mother was in tears because she had heard that it had been a successful audition. So that was the end of the Royal College of Music. Everything that my parents had sort of struggled for was now out the window. So there you go. That was it. Then we were off. We went to Cornwall to rehearse, and that was the beginning of the attractions.
Yeah, amazing. Tell us about your first couple of gigs with the attractions. What's your recollection of that? How did it go?
Well, I remember very clearly, actually, the first one, because the other guys had all been in bands before. So, that was one thing. For them, it was something they'd already done. But I had been in one band before, but it wasn't a rock band. It was a sort of semi-professional, I don't know, covers band. And it was funny because when I joined there, I had to get a keyboard, and I got a Vox Organ. And that is weird that Vox Organ, I already had it. And I had an Insta piano on the top of it. It was really a quite primitive technology, but that served me in the semi-pro band I was in when I was like 15. And when I started working with Elvis, I just brought the same thing along. I already had that, So there you go. The first gig we did was in Penzance in Cornwall, and we were on the same bill as Wayne County and the Electric Chairs. And Wayne County was in the process of becoming Jane County, but hadn't quite gone that far, but was about to, And it was a tiny little club, and we had to share a dressing room and everything. And it was my first experience of of a gig. And I remember very clearly stepping out of that dressing room onto that stage, and the feeling of the audience being so close to you was quite, I would say, almost alarming, particularly in those days, because it was the beginning of the punk era, and the audience were doing horrible things to the people on stage, you know. But anyway, that was my first experience of
Yeah, it's amazing. Thanks for sharing. I just wanted to quickly touch on, we're going to talk about gear a bit later, but I wanted to quickly touch on the Vox. So you mentioned you already had the Vox organ, so
yes.
you're comfortable with that. To me, that's a very iconic sound. It's very much associated with the Attractions. Your band members, how did they react to that sound? Did it just always seem like the natural thing to be bringing along, or was it just that you had it?
I think I think it was exactly what they kind of hoped for, actually. It was a sort of serendipity thing. And what was equally strange, I suppose, was at the audition, it was a Hammond organ. So they hadn't really thought that was what they wanted, because they would have had a different thing at the audition, wouldn't they? So, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but the first recording that I did was on Watching the Detectives. And so a lot of spooky tones coming out of Vox, because I had a Vox Jaguar when I began. But eventually they got me a Vox Continental with two manuals. And on top of it, it was kind of weird. I had an Insta piano, but then recently, not that recently, but I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to get back to the roots. And I studied some photos of what we actually had. And it was an a Roland electric piano. And I managed to find one on eBay, and I had it completely restored. So I've now got the exact sort of beginning setup.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, that is great. And
Yeah.
Steve, I mean, we could spend hours talking about those first couple of albums, but I mean, I know in another interview you said you were asked about one of your favorite albums of all time, and you cited this year's Model as one of your favorite albums. So using that as an illustration of this period, what was your take on that creative relationship and the magic that you guys were creating in those early days? What are your recollections of that?
Well, I think that on the very first one that we did, this year's Model, there was less of a sort of, there was probably less discussion and sort of, what are we doing? There was just getting on with it and doing what we were doing, what was just naturally happening. Whereas later on, there was different processes going on that, you know. So that's why I think I like that album so much, because also it doesn't sound like any other album, does it? I mean, it's got its unique sound to it, which has never been, no one has ever done something like that, I don't think. So I think that is one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite Elvis Costello albums.
Yeah, and look, talking about the transition and the various albums that you went through, we're moving into the early 80s, and the sound's getting more sophisticated, things are changing. I believe you're using things like a Yamaha CP80 and a Prophet 5. Your compositional skills are becoming very important. Coming back to it's funny, you were saying before your mum was thinking what a waste of time, but everything your parents had worked for you were leaving the Royal College. But I guess all those compositional skills really came in handy in this role.
I was thinking about that because the other day, I've got this box that my father sent to me a long time ago, and inside there's lots of sort of old bits of paper, you know. And one of them, I was looking at it the other day, was a letter that he wrote to Yehudi Menuhin, because Yehudi Menuhin had a music school in England, and my dad was trying to get me, somewhere to go, because I was just totally crazy about, the piano, and when I was 5 years old, but they didn't accept me. So he didn't get me in there. So the fact that I got to the Royal College of Music was like, he was thinking, well, that is it now. He's going to be fine.
He's
But,
made it. Yeah.
I didn't follow it through, you know. So,
Yeah.
I
But
sometimes
yeah,
wonder what would have happened if I had have followed it through,
yeah, it's almost like a sliding doors
because
moment, isn't it?
it would have been a different world. But I'm happy with the way
Yeah, well,
things have gone.
I think
Very
a lot of
happy.
music fans are pretty happy too, Steve, with the way it turned out. So I don't think there's too many complaints there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious though how this new technology may have informed your composition and what you were able to do differently using synthesizers and that sort of thing later on as we moved into the early 80s. How did that
When I
affect
think
things?
about that now, now it's a different world, because everything's on the internet and there's so much information and you can find out stuff. But back then, that wasn't like that. And so part of the reason that I bought certain things, I think, was was less informed. I wasn't really informed about what to go for. Um, the first thing I bought, the first synthesizer I bought was a Moog, and that was a good choice, obviously. And I think the Prophet 5 was a good choice at the time, but slowly as technology has advanced, uh, and some very weird sort of digital stuff has arrived, we could be in danger, of what we actually managed to collect. Something that's good at the moment now is the fact that you can collect a lot of virtual instruments and learn about the real ones without actually having to have a place to put them.
Exactly.
And that's great, I think. I mean, even for me, I've never really worked in a real. I mean, I've worked in a studio as a musician, but they never let you get your hands on the desk or do anything, And so this is great. Now I can load up a Nieve desk into my computer and mess about with it, and I can, you know, I know now how it works and everything. So this is good, because they tried to keep all that stuff away from us,
Well, it's a good point, Steve. And speaking of studios, I mean, right back to, this year's model through to even, A Boy Named If. What is the studio collaborative relationship like when Elvis comes in with the new songs? How does that tend to work, and how's it evolved over the years?
Well, that's something that evolved. So at the beginning it was one thing, and then it changed, and then, depending on what album you're talking about, it could be different. So, for example, we made an album called Blood and Chocolate. Now, that album was recorded after a sort of period of destabilization, I would say. And the whole thing about the recording of that album was we had no idea what the songs were. He would arrive, play us the song twice, and then we would have to record it.
Wow.
And that was that. And the tension and everything of that was embedded in that recording because of the process that that we all accepted, And so that was interesting. I think they've all been very different. Imperial Bedroom was fantastic because it was in Paul McCartney's building, and heavily influenced by our love of the Beatles, and the fact that we made some orchestral arrangements, and we worked with Jeff Emerick, and there was much more thought process going on than when we made this year's model, where we were just getting our thing recorded,
That's
So
right.
they've all been different, very different. I tell you what I really loved was working with Allen Toussaint, because, we've worked with several producers, and producers are sort of people who try to get the best out of you on the day, right? And that's what they're all good at. But Allen Toussaint was good at that, but he was also an incredible musician himself, and it was brilliant. You know, the first time we worked with him, we made a recording for Yoko Ono's album that she made after John Lennon was murdered, and we had to record "Walking on Thin Ice."
Wow!
And Elvis said, "I'll do it if Allen Toussaint is the producer," which was quite weird that he came up with that idea. And it was quite weird that Allen Toussaint did it. But he basically, we went in his studio in New Orleans, and it's the only time it's ever happened. The producer came to each one of us, took our instrument, and showed us what he wanted us to do.
Wow!
Like, here's the bass line, here's, you know, and it's one of the best things we ever recorded, I think. I love it, you know.
That's amazing.
And then later on, we did that River in Reverse, and we ended up doing a tour where it was a sort of it was sort of half Allen Toussaint's band and half the Elvis Costello group, and I was on a riser playing Hammond organ, overlooking Allen Toussaint's piano. So it was fantastic.
Wow!
And I got to see him play every night in close up. You know.
Yeah, that's
so
incredible.
That was a great memory.
No, thanks, Steve. And just while we're in that broad Beatles territory, I did want to briefly talk about your stint as, you know, an MD and band leader with Steve Nieve and the Playboys for Jonathan Ross's show. So tell us a little bit about what the learning curve was for you there, because obviously TV band work is incredibly hectic at times. There's lots of songs to learn on a regular basis. Just what are your recollections of that? And obviously there's that famous performance with McCartney.
Well, I think in hindsight, looking back on it, I wasn't really aware of the sort of heritage of American shows, like, you know, where they have that kind of setup that Jonathan was just such a big fan of. And so I went into it without knowing about that. I just said, okay, I'm going to do this, and did it to the best of my ability. But I realize now that it's sort of been done many times by many different people in different ways. I think we tackled it each week. Whatever we had to do, we put everything into trying to make it like it should be, you know. Whereas now I've seen things like, you know, Saturday Night Live and all that kind of stuff, where they just sound like them and they don't make any effort to do what they're doing. And so for a while that worked very well, I think. But I think it kind of, we played with everybody. Everybody came on our show, and we played with James Brown, we played with Paul McCartney, we played with so many different people. So it was great, and I you know, I'm very thankful for that experience. And but if I had to do it again, I might do it a little bit differently.
What would you have done differently, Steve?
I don't know. Well, at one point I did manage to get a Hammond organ into the TV studio, and it was there permanently. But there was a moment where instead of a Hammond, because we were trying to replicate so many different things, I had two Roland D50s. Now that was a bad combination. But anyway, no, I think I love that Jules Holland show. He's got his grand piano in there, and that's a very sensible move. That's one of the things that maybe we could have done better. We could have had a proper piano.
I do want to pay a compliment, though, Steve. Having watched a few of those performances of your band on the show, including the McCartney performance, you had at that stage you had a DX7 on top and a D50 down low, and I was really impressed with the acoustic piano sound, the transistor organ sound. You actually pulled some really amazing sounds out of those two keyboards.
No, I did, but it was two D50s. I don't think it was a DX7.
Okay.
I think I had two. You know, it was a stupid idea, really. The best thing that happened, and I think that on your show you sometimes ask what was the worst stage experience you ever had.
Yes.
And one thing that happened on that show was that we had Tom Jones come on that show. Now, I don't know if you're a big fan of Tom Jones, like I am.
Yes, we are.
But anyway, he recently wrote his autobiography, and he did say some very kind things about my band and what we did on Jonathan's show, because he came on it several times. Anyway, one time he came on, and for the play out of the show, we were going to do It's Not Unusual. And for some reason, we had to play something just before his song, which I had decided to put the transpose button on and play in a different key from the rest of the band. And I did that, and then obviously forgot to switch it off. And so when we launched into It's Not Unusual, it was very unusual, because the transpose button was still on.
Oh.
But luckily, my trusty guitarist leaned over and switched it off for me.
That's amazing. Love it.
But that was very unusual at that time.
Yes, absolutely. Look, no, Tom is an absolute icon.
Yeah.
And so
also, it was good because recently I've been doing a lot of. I did during the COVID years. I started doing this broadcast from my house with my wife's son, who is a singer. And so it gave me a little insight into the whole thing of preparing other people's songs. And so we started to put together a show every night, which we broadcast. And our whole day was, what are we going to do? Sometimes we would have a theme, like songs about rivers or whatever the theme was. And we'd prepare our set list. We had to make, if we didn't know the songs, we had to learn them. We had to make the scores. And so during that first outbreak of COVID, we did 100 shows. We did one show every night. So,
which is incredible. And I know, Steve, you ended up releasing part of that. I think it's All About Love, the album, sort of a couple of years ago. So, I mean, that was an incredible effort. What are some highlights of those shows that you can recall? So, I know you played all.
Well, some of the shows we actually had invited guests. So we actually managed to have Elvis come through on the internet, and we have a projector here. So we were projecting him onto my wall and doing duets, which is technically impossible because of the delay. But we were able to do it because I think we've played together for so long that we know what we're doing, and also we kept it simple, and we didn't use any other technology than just our mobile phones.
Wow.
And so we had Chris Difford, Glenn Tilbrook. We had, friends of ours drop in.
Yeah. No, I definitely recommend to our listeners and watchers checking out the album. We'll link to it in the show notes because it is incredible. And we're also going to come back in a little while, Steve, to your other solo stuff as well. But just before we move on to that, you've talked about your session work. And I did want to call out too, obviously, there was the work you did by Bowie, and then working on one of Madness's albums. Just, I'm really interested as a session player, did you have to change your approach where you're sort of needing to adjust to what they're requiring of you versus your natural?
I did a bit. When I played on Absolute Beginners, there was a demo, obviously, of it, and it was produced by Clive Langer, who I'd worked with a lot. On the demo, there was some really amazing synthesizer parts, which I had to replicate, and it was great fun. I think we used a Selena string machine or something like that. Yeah, beautiful. So those sort of things. I mean, Clive Langer had an incredible studio quite close to where I lived in London, and when I wasn't touring with Elvis, I was down there nearly all the time. Clive would be saying, come and play on this, come and play on that. And it was great. And unfortunately, those days are gone now because those kind of studios, they exist, but very few people want to use them because they can basically do all of that at home. Sort of.
The era of the session musicians definitely changed to what it was, that's for sure. David mentioned earlier that we wanted to talk a bit about and explore some of his solo work, and I'm interested in some of the contemporary opera that you've done. Welcome to the Voice. Interested
Yes.
in that approach, writing an opera, and there's some idiosyncratic voices that you've had to write for there, such as Sting and Robert Wyatt. Give us an insight into that process and the challenges it posed for you.
Well, the thing about Welcome to the Voice was it was a collaboration with my life partner Muriel. So she invented the idea of that work, which was a steel worker who falls in love with an opera singer, and all the men are going to be rock singers and all the girls are going to be opera singers. That was really her idea, and it's a beautiful idea, and that's what prompted the whole thing to take the shape that it took. And when we first began it, we did it with a different cast than ended up on the recording of it. So the first time we did it was in New York at the Town Hall Theatre, and we had Ron Sexsmith doing the part that Robert Wyatt does, and we had John Flausberg from They Might Be Giants doing the chief of police, and he did a really crazy chief of police. It was great. And so that was the first version. The Brodsky Quartet were on it, and so they were ready to go for the second version. They'd already done it once. One of the things about it was again, my collaborator Casada was heavily involved when we did it the second time, because he learned all of the opera and was able to do the parts for anybody who wasn't present at a rehearsal.
Wow.
So it was great, because Mr. Costello, for example, arrived really at the last minute. And so Casada did all of his parts during the rehearsals. Sting was amazing and was absolutely invited us to work with him for 6 weeks before we even started recording it, because he was so determined to get his part. It's just the way he is. I think he's a perfectionist, and so it was a really top experience of mine for many reasons.
Yeah, the collaboration aspect sounds amazing and wonderful. And you mentioned Muriel was a key inspiration and muse, and I believe she might have done the libretto for the opera as well. Have there been other projects that you've collaborated with Muriel on over the journey?
Well, we are working at the moment on a new project, and that's in the process of the writing stage. We've written songs together. And I made an album called Together that she wrote some of the words on it. She is directing films, so she made a film called Sand Plum, unleaded, which Elvis has a role in, and I got to do the music for her. So I've posted a few things of that on the internet. You can find it. I would say that is ready to become a cult movie.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I mean, you've mentioned Together, Steve. I definitely wanted to talk about that because, again, the collaborations on that are incredible. And I've seen an interview with Sting talking about this, his the song he sang on You Lie Sweetly. And he talks about how that song and the overall album challenges people's ears and that it's a real musician's album, which is about as high a compliment as you can get. Just tell us about how you approach that, because it is incredibly diverse and such amazing collaborators.
Yes. Well, we are about to see Sting's, I don't know what you want to call it, stage music theatre piece, which is called The Last Ship, is coming to Paris in a short while. Welcome to the Voice, I think, was an experience for all of us, because we performed it at the Châtelet Theatre, which is one of the biggest opera houses in Paris. I remember when I took Sting to see the stage, before we started working on the rehearsals, he said, "Oh my God," it was like, the stage is colossal, because, they store all the scenery and so even Sting, when he walked on that stage, was like, wow, and there's some funny memories from that. I know Muriel was directing the show, and she had to direct Sting. And because Sting is the lead singer of the Police, he said, I'm just used to standing here and looking straight out at the audience and doing my song. And when you're singing in an opera, that's not what you have to do. You have to sometimes direct yourself in different directions. So there was some funny moments,
Love it.
It was a great experience for all of us, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And compositionally, Steve, were there any particular challenges? I mean, again, going back to your Royal College of Music education, and again, paid off, I would have thought, but what did you apply from both the your other session work and your compositional stuff to be able to, feel confident doing an opera?
Well, one of the aspects of it was to have people playing music that was written out and other people improvising around them. And that was the sort of challenge of the piece. Eventually, when we did the main version at the Châtelet, at the Théâtre du Châtelet, we had on stage certain soloists that were going to improvise around the score. For the Châtelet, I expanded the score, so instead of a string quartet, we had a string orchestra with percussions, so it was a bigger sound. And we had a trumpetist called Ibrahim Malouf. He's a very well-known guy now, but at the time he wasn't. He was just starting out. But he's a wonderful trumpet player. And we had Ned Rothenberg, who had played on the New York version, who's an amazing jazz improviser. And we also had another soloist, I think Vincent Seagal. On the record, we had Mark Rebo, who played a few electric guitar parts. I don't think we tried that at the Théâtre du Châtelet. The problem with it was we wanted these people to be on stage and visible. And I think Ibrahim, the trumpet player, was able to be on stage, but it wasn't. There were little things like that, little details that we couldn't actually achieve. And that when we do it again, which I hope will be one day, we will solve these problems. But I think that's the nature of that work. We need to do it more than once. Invite us to Australia, we can do it there.
Oh, look, it should be at the Opera House.
Absolutely.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly.
That would be the ideal place for it, I think.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. No, we'll try and make that happen for you, Steve.
Okay.
We have
there's a lot of good festivals that you have in Sydney and Melbourne.
There is.
So
absolutely.
True,
yeah. And speaking of festivals, Steve, you've played a lot, obviously, with Elvis and stuff. And I did want to talk about your rig. So we're not a totally gear-focused show, but your keyboard rig, I would argue, is still one of the most impressive contemporary rigs as far as both size and complexity and so on. So just tell us about your current rig with Elvis, and it's sort of a cockpit. You've got everything on four sides. You go between them fluidly. Just tell us about your approach there.
Well, one of the aspects of it is that Elvis likes to play the piano. And so the piano situation has sort of slightly warped my rig, because it's not incorporated into a normal position where it would be easy for me to play all my keyboards. because it needs to be in a place where when he goes to the piano, he's very visible and in command of the band. So instead of it being like an L shape or an H shape, or it's turned into a sort of, I don't know what shape, as a Z shape or something like that, you know. But basically, I've got the setup that I had when we first began as the Attractions, the Vox Organ with the Roland electric piano on top of it. That's one part of it. Then I've got a thing that I call the Muriel keyboard, which is a sort of a container that has two keyboards inside it, basically. And my keyboard technician got a sticker that says Muriel and put it on the side, so it's the Muriel keyboard, which was very nice of him. So inside that there is an 88 note keyboard that drives anything I want through MIDI and stuff. And above that there is an organ that replaces the Hammond organ, because the Hammond, as much as we love it, is a nightmare to tour with, and it's always going wrong and stuff. So I found this, what it is called a MAG, M-A-G, and it's made in Eastern Europe somewhere, and it sounds amazing. So that I just got the single manual MAG and the 88 note keyboard hidden away inside that. Then the additional things that start happening is that now there is a Fender Rhodes appearing behind me. This is because Elvis loves to play the piano, but now he loves to play the Fender Rhodes, which is quite good. And so I remembered that I had a Wurlitzer, and so I got my Wurlitzer out and put that in an L shape with the Fender Rhodes. So now we've got that rig above my rig, which gives us another set of colors. So it is really over the top and completely mad. And I wouldn't do that if I was doing a solo gig, because setting that all up would be impossible for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you've mentioned your keyboard tech. I mean, I'm assuming, Steve, between songs, he's doing the switching of patches and doing the MIDI stuff for you, or you're literally switching between songs?
No, we've got a system where it because I don't play the same thing twice if I can help it. So we never know what's going to happen. But it's set up so that I can switch to whatever I want. I've been through two very, very good keyboard techs, actually. One guy who is currently, he's a great musician, and he's playing with David Byrne on the new show of David Byrne.
Daniel Mintzeris?
Yeah.
Yeah, Daniel's coming on the show in a couple of weeks.
Oh, good. So when Daniel, when we first decided to go kind of high tech, I asked Daniel to help me with the design of it all, and he did a great job and completely configured a sort of Ableton setup for me. And he knows more about that than anyone I know. I then had a second keyboard tech who arrived because Daniel, he was doing his musical thing, and so the second keyboard tech came along. His name is Apollo Ray.
Okay,
and he has appeared on stage actually because he triggers certain things. And he completely redesigned my rig, took the whole thing to bits and rebuilt it with a totally different system so that no one understands it at all now, you know. So it's got a life of its own.
It certainly does. And for our listeners and viewers, we'll link to some videos of Steve playing live just last year. And it is incredible. In one song, Steve, you're literally going around all 4 points of the compass. And it also appears that, there's some mirroring of sounds on different keyboards so you can jump between, and there's continuity of sound. It's just incredible. So, yeah, we'll definitely link to that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is the real grand piano is great when we're doing a show where it's just, a duo show with Elvis and he's just singing and I'm playing the piano. But with the band, it's actually quite impossible to use that, particularly with the volume that we play at. So it's midied up, and so in fact the sound that it generates is the same as when I play my other keyboard. So that's why you get that effect. It's a very good sound, I think.
You almost, you leave yourself a bit of room to be free and to express yourself when you're playing live. And as David said, that's very evident in the way you approach things from a physiology point of view. But some of these songs you're playing, they're 45 years old. And how are you keeping them fresh for yourself every night? What's the expectation between playing something that people recognise, but also keeping it fresh and exciting for yourself and for the band?
Well, the oldest songs, we don't play them every night, and sometimes we don't play them at all. We are generally playing more recent songs, and for a little time there, we did several tours where we were basically playing pretty much new material most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to those old songs is a treat that I love, and that is the last show that we did was to do the early songs. But some of those have changed and developed, and I never have the feeling that I'm doing something that I'm doing that again. I don't have that feeling with those songs.
Yep.
They don't give me that feeling. I don't know if we play them exactly the same. I think that all of us have developed sort of new ways of playing. A good example is Pete Thomas, the way he plays the drums now compared to the way he used to play them has completely evolved, and it's great. I love what he does, but now he doesn't play. They still sound like they're supposed to, but he doesn't play in the same way, I don't think.
Yeah, there's definitely
what does he do differently? Well, one thing he does differently is that he has developed a much more sensitive way of playing. And another thing that he has developed slowly through the years is a sort of economy of playing that's very much his style. Is which has become more and more economic, if you see what I mean. And it's quite it's a very startling sort of thing, the economy of what he does.
Such an incredible player. And I know, Steve, many years ago, I saw one of the chocolate wheel, roulette wheel gigs in Sydney, and I was unaware of Pete's work until I attended that gig, and he just blew me away. Between your work and his work, I went, wow, it was just amazing. Right. And so, Steve, we've on our last two questions, and it's hard to encapsulate your career in an hour, but are there other collaborations you've taken part in that we haven't covered that have been particular highlights for you through your career?
Yes, there's one thing I would mention, which would be a collaboration with a guy called David Coulter. He puts together shows which are kind of like, so we did the Rain Dogs Revisited, and it was the songs of Tom Waits with different singers, and he put together a really big band. I mean, there was probably 7 people in the band. And so I've done several projects with him that have been great. One of them was the Great Australian Songbook.
Oh, wow.
And we only did it once. We came all the way to Australia, and we played on the beach in, I think it was in Brisbane, I think.
Oh, there you go.
Most peculiar, yeah.
Oh.
And he had several really well-known artists, and had compiled a set list of songs that are all actually Australian songs. and it was called The Great Australian Songbook. So you might want to
I'll
try to
definitely
find
be looking
that.
that up. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll check it out.
No, thank you.
Yes.
No, great call out.
Oh, that was good fun. The other thing is that I'm now doing some concerts under the title of About Love, which is an idea of Muriel's that we have put together a set list that's mainly our original songs, but it mixed in with it are some Costello and some Tom Waits songs. And Casada is, singing some of the most difficult songs that Elvis has ever written, I would say. So I'm hoping that this year we'll get to the UK and the west coast of the US. We did the east coast of the US last year. So that's another collaboration that I really love doing.
Amazing.
Yeah, wonderful. We punish all our guests, Steve, with this next question, which is, if you were to be stranded on a desert island and you could only take 5 albums with you, what would those 5 albums be?
Well, the problem with that question is that the 5 albums change every week.
Yes.
You know,
Of course they
I'm
do.
constantly interested in another 5 albums. But right now, I would say one of the albums would be Casada's first album, which he's about to make.
Great.
I can't wait to hear that. He's got some great songs, and they'll be on that album. And first albums are always a joy, I think. So I'm looking forward to that. That would be one of them. The second album would probably be Eric Satie. I would go for Eric Satie because I like his music so much that even I've borrowed some of his music for one of my songs.
Yeah.
I've got this song called I'm an Englishman in Saint-Germain, which is set to a melody of Eric Satie. And this is a bit unfair, I suppose, for your question, but I would go for the Goldberg variations.
Nice.
Because there's so many of them. I mean, versions of that piece. And I'm just discovering a new version at the moment, which is by a guy called Yuri Kane.
Okay.
And he actually decided to add a few variations of his own, you know. So that's quite exciting. Okay, well, Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder, because that's got all the keyboards that you could possibly want to play on it. And all the different keyboard sounds and just great songs and everything. And my final choice would be for Bob Dylan's Rough and Rowdy Ways album, which I have been listening to a lot. I really love that album.
Amazing. Steve, we're going to let you go, and you've been very generous with your time. We cannot thank you enough. This has been 5 years where I've dreamed of being able to speak with you, and it's been a thrill to absolutely do so. We will get cracking on, the performance of the opera at the Sydney Opera House. Leave that with us.
Yes, if you could do that. Or just get About Love to come to Australia.
That'd be good.
And then while we're down there, we'll get working on those festivals.
That's right.
We'll use our considerable
I can't thank you
powers
enough. It's an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
And there we have it. Look, if ever there's a time, Paul, to be up and at 'em at 4 a.m. in the morning, it's to talk to Steve Nieve.
I couldn't agree more. I didn't feel tired at all. He was awesome to talk to, and it's just great hearing some of those stories. And I love that. I love that whole idea of, hey, I'm browsing a music magazine. Here's an ad, and the next thing you know, I'm part of Elvis Costello in the attractions. I love that idea of just sitting and watching the other auditionees roll through too. I was just thinking that would be maybe off-putting for them, having him sitting in the corner doing that.
Yeah. Love it. No, love his approach to playing and music. And yeah, I will link in the show notes to Sting's. It's only a short, I think it's about a 3-minute interview with Sting about singing on Steve's solo album. And it's obvious that, and it's just one example, that Steve is perceived as a musician's musician by so many people, and it's evident in the work he outputs. So yeah, it was an absolute thrill to speak with him. So again, thank you, Steve, for that. Thank you all out there for for listening as always. I just want to give a quick shout out to our gold and silver supporters, the amazing Tammy Catcher for Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you, Tammy, as always. The brilliant Mike at Midnight Mastering. If you're creating your own music and need someone great to mix and master it, Mike is the guy. Dave and the team at the musicplayer.com forums, a great place, the keyboard corner to hang out. They just did some great coverage of NAMM. At one stage, Paul, we were going to be at NAMM, but it wasn't to be.
It just didn't happen, David.
Yeah.
We'll make it happen.
We'll make it happen one day, maybe post 2028.
After we finish getting Steve to the Opera House.
Yeah, that's right. We get Steve to the Opera House first. So, no, thank you to all our golden... Oh, and sorry, I'm also forgetting from the sunny land of Wales, Mr. Dewey Evans. Thank you, sir, as always, for your support. So, yeah, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Thank you all for listening. Do keep in touch. Until we talk in a couple of weeks, keep on playing.